listening to Coffee and Conversation with Recovery Advocate Network, the nonprofit organization that strives to address the staggering disparity in resource availability for individuals suffering from mental health disorders, processing disorders, addictions, trauma healing, and sexual identity challenges. Together, we strive to end the stigma associated with these challenges so that true healing can begin. Welcome back to Coffee and Conversation with Recovery Advocate Network. I'm your host, Ange, and welcome you to episode number 28. Today, we welcome back Sasha Young. This is the third episode in our unique three-part series where I interviewed Joshua Young in episode 26 about his story and the book Craving Recovery. Then I interviewed Sasha in episode 27 to hear her perspectives of his struggle, recovery, and impact on her. And today, I will interview her about her own trauma and resilience story. A power couple that I truly admire. If you missed the earlier episodes, make sure you go back and listen to them. This episode includes sensitive topics. If you feel it may be triggering to you, then we encourage you to listen to the episode in a therapeutic community to ensure you are safe and supported. So, what are we waiting for? Fill up your coffee, sit back, and let's get started. Okay, listeners, we are recording today on Sunday, October 29th. I have Miss Sasha Young here with me, and I'm really excited because this will be a really cool three-part series. And so the first interview was with Sasha's husband, Josh, and we talked about his book, Craving Recovery. And I mentioned in the reading the book and preparing, he spoke so highly of Sasha. I knew Sasha was a badass. And so I said, would she be interested in being interviewed? And you said yes. And so we had a great time talking about your experience in walking along that recovery journey with him. And then you shared that you have an amazing personal growth and recovery and history and story of where you're at today that you would love to share with the listeners as well. So that's why we're here today. So now it's time for me to stop talking and say, hey, Sasha, introduce yourself again, and let's just dig in and tell us why you're here.
Okay, well, I'm Sasha Young. I am married to Joshua Young, the author of Craving Recovery, and I am his wife who just really helped him out and really put his recovery first above all problems. A little bit about myself. I too come from my own trauma. I was molested at 6 years old by a family member. I was emotionally abandoned at 13 between my parents amidst their divorce. I was raped at 18 by my boyfriend's best friend. I was a single mom at 25. I have endured a lot of growth, a lot of traumas in my life. I lost my first husband when I was 36 to a heart attack. But my biggest lesson was with an alcoholic. I was about 32 years old, and I had bought myself a house. It was 2005, 2006. And I had a neighbor who I became really close with, who also had two girls. And at the time I was a single mom. I was Noah's mom. I think he was about 6 when I bought this house. And so her and I became really close, and I didn't really know that she was an alcoholic at the time. So we would do lots of things together. She would constantly be coming over to my house. As soon as I got home from work, we'd have a cocktail, whatever. She came over one day and she told me that she just had this problem. And so she told me she was an alcoholic and that she would hide her alcohol underneath the sink in the bathroom so she could have her fixed in the middle of the night or wherever she kept her alcohol. I didn't know at the time or had been around alcoholics that I knew of, right? I was drinking actively, but I didn't recognize how much that she was actually drinking because I wasn't paying attention. I wasn't always around her. So long story short, she tried to get sober a couple different times. And the very last time, my last interaction with her at the time, my first husband and I had gone away for the weekend. And so I had asked her, my neighbor, to watch my dog for me. It was just over the weekend. And when I came home, unbeknownst to us, she had gone through my entire household and drank every bottle of alcohol that was in my house. And let me tell you, I felt so guilty that I had left alcohol in my house knowing that she was sober, and leaving the house for a weekend and having handles of vodka in my freezer or up above the cabinet, up above the refrigerator. This was my first real experience with an alcoholic. It was very shocking. I used to have dreams, nightmares of her being sober and me giving her shots. I would dream of this. And after several therapy sessions, along the way in life, you have therapy, whatever. I think it's amazing for everybody. My therapist told me that wasn't your problem. You ended up with, a little bit of PTSD, a little bit of trauma from this experience. And so that was my first experience with an alcoholic. And moving on, life moved on, and I got married to my husband, my previous husband. He passed away when our son was just 3, a week after he had passed away. So I was a widow at 36. I met Josh about 6 weeks later. And so that was kind of my experience with an alcoholic moving into an alcoholic, which again, I had absolutely no idea of his secrets. I didn't know of Josh's alcoholism at that point when we, had started dating and started living together. I would say probably about a year and a half, 2 years of us living together, I started finding bottles. And I would find bottles in the laundry room, the very top shelf. And I would say, I'd ask him, hey, where did this come from? And it was all cheap vodka, right? All bottom of the shelf, really cheap vodka. And he would say, oh, maybe it's Noah's. And at the time, Noah was in high school, kind of, getting into that high school. So I kind of thought, I don't think that's really Noah's, because I have a pretty good relationship with my oldest. And so these were my red flags. And I would always think of my neighbor when I would find these bottles. That was my base experience with alcoholism. As Josh came to me that Valentine's Day in 2018, telling me that he needed help, everything that I learned from my neighbor all came rushing back to me. And I knew that this was such a huge thing that he was coming to me for and telling me that he really needed this help from all of my own traumas, that I knew that I had to stay calm and just listen to what he was telling me in his own voice. So him coming to me and saying, I have a problem, I really need to get some help. After finding all of these bottles, for me, it was a relief that he was coming to me with his first step. I have a problem, I need help. That's just kind of where that started, with really helping my husband and being calm and collected. And I find that I thrive in stressful situations. And maybe that has something to do with my own background of being a survivor of sexual abuse as a child, being raped at 18, and not really dealing with these previous traumas until I was in my 40s, specifically 44. 2019 was a real healing year for me. Lots of traumas that I had with my family, my mom. I had the opportunity to heal, sitting down and talking out our life over 8 hours on the couch with my mom crying. I mean, just having so much acknowledgement from the things that I had gone through as a child, just healed within that conversation with my mom. Lots and lots and lots of therapy for every stage of my life. I feel like I've been through a lot of healing therapy. I definitely was in therapy 2 or 3 days after my husband passed away. Funny enough, my best friend had come in the morning that my husband had passed away. And the first thing that I had said to him was, I need you to remove all of the alcohol out of my house, because I can see myself drinking this alcohol and drowning my sorrows. I can't do that because I have kids I have to watch. I have to be mom. I need you to remove that alcohol. And at the time he said, okay, not a problem. Funny enough, 3 months later when I got it back, he handed me back this big bag of alcohol. Unbeknownst to him, his girlfriend at the time was an alcoholic, and she drank it all and left the bottles in there and gave me back empty bottles, which I was laughing at because I didn't really need to have that alcohol back in the first place. But it just is a real testament to how many people are around you that really have problems that you really aren't aware of.
I'm dying laughing because I can picture that as well. And I'm also thinking about what you just said, which I believe that's the magic in it. We don't realize how many people around us are struggling with a diverse amount of life challenges that we know nothing about, and how eye-opening it is to see that.
Exactly. And so I kind of laughed it off and I moved on. So after my husband had passed away, gosh, my little guy was Cooper at the time was only 3. He had been 3 for 1 week, and his dad passed away of a massive heart attack. This was his 3rd heart attack. His first was when he was 30. His second at 35, where they placed 7 stents and a pacemaker. His final one was when he was 41. A little background on that. It was August 7th, 2011, and he woke me up at 12:45 and said to me, I need you to call the ambulance because my angina is acting up. And I said, okay. He said, but when you call them, tell them that I'm having shortness of breath and I'm having tingling in my arm. And at the time, I had taken a Tylenol PM, so I was in that Tylenol PM haze. I wasn't thinking clearly of what he was telling me. So I called the ambulance, and my late husband had already had his bags packed along with his briefcase ready to go to the hospital. He was standing outside of our garage waving down the ambulance as this ambulance is for him. They gave him all of his stats, which were excellent, by the way. His blood pressure was a lot lower than it has been very long time. But because he was complaining about shortness of breath and tingling, they still had to take him to the hospital. So the EMT looked at me after they had loaded him up, like, are you going to get in the ambulance with us? And I said, no, I've got a 3-year-old upstairs. I've done this before, the waiting game, being taken to the hospital. So I went back upstairs to be with Cooper until I got some information back from my late husband. His name was Lance. Lance had been texting me back and forth. And on the way to the hospital, he texted me and said, I've had a heart attack. Please don't be mad at me. And I texted him back. I said, I could never be mad at you for having a heart attack. I'm so sorry you're in pain. I will be at the hospital as soon as Cooper wakes up. About an hour later, he texted me and said, I'm going to the cath lab. Please get here now. And I text back, what is the cath lab? Well, he didn't text back. And unfortunately, I ended up falling back asleep until about 3:18, where I got another phone call from the hospital from a nurse and said, your husband's condition has changed and you need to get here now. So I grabbed up Cooper and stuck him in the car. It's, 3:30, 3:25, whatever in the morning. We get over to Hoag Hospital in Irvine, and I went through the emergency, and they took me to the center of the hospital, which is very hollow. You could hear a pin drop in there. And the doctor came out with a nurse and said, I'm so sorry. We did everything we could, but he's passed. And I said, you're not punking me, are you? Because at the time, Ashton Kutcher had this show, punked. And I said, you're not punking me, right? Like, this isn't funny. Like, he came in for angina, and he said, I'm sorry. He had a massive heart attack, and we've been working on him for 50 minutes. So his pacemaker kept giving them false readings. And essentially, he died on the table. He had already told me that is exactly where he was going, would be on a table, which is super sad. So I had absolutely no idea what to do. I had this 3-year-old and I had an 11-year-old now that I had to take care of by myself. I just knew that I had to be strong for my boys. And so that's what I did. It was terrible. About 6 weeks later, I met Josh off of Plenty of Fish. And he is.
I'm laughing because I saw like in your head, I could read Sasha's thinking, am I going to say it? Am I not going to say it? If I'm going to say it, am I not going to say it? I'm so glad you did.
I'm going to say it because, and my sister at the time had said, let's just get online and create a persona for you. At some point you're going to have to get out in the world again. And I just wasn't quite ready, but what hurt was it going to do just to look at people, right? I'm in the privacy of my home. Let me just look to see what's out there. And I did. I wasn't looking for it. It just kind of happened. And so I saw this profile of Josh, and he was there with his son, Trey. And I would say Trey was probably 3 or 4 at the time. And he had these big bulging muscles and totally different from what my husband had looked like. And I don't know. So I don't know. I reached out to him and I said, I read his profile and it said that he had been divorced twice. And I said, well, maybe third time's the charm. But that was kind of it. And, we talked for several days and we met up. And again, I wasn't looking for anything. I think at that time now in hindsight, I was really looking to feel something again because I was super numb from losing my husband. I needed to feel something. So with me going out on a dating website was me trying to feel something that I hadn't felt from being numb. And it kind of ended up being that he would be my future husband.
That is an amazing story. Okay. So then you guys courted, dated, got married, obviously. You've been married, remind me, 12? How many years have you been married?
6.5 years. We've been married for 6.5 years,
okay.
Together for 12.
Okay. I'm happy I did not pick that 12 number out of nowhere. Okay. That is awesome. And so I recall in some of the things that we were talking about and reading, there were little snippets in his book where when he was talking about his shadow monster and the trauma and how much, and listeners, please, when you listen to this is going to be the 3rd episode in the series. So go back and listen to Josh's and read the book, Craving Recovery. And when he didn't want to share the shadow monster with anyone. And I recall you saying that there was something that you recognized of your own pain in him that triggered some of the questions that came out. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. It was October 2019. I woke up one morning and I felt like the curtain had just lifted up from me and I could clearly see Josh as he was as a person. I've never felt that way or seen anyone that way the day that I had that morning. With such clarity, it was actually quite scary. With doing that, it was, I don't know, maybe a Monday or a Tuesday, and I was in esthetician school. And so I drove to school and I had been crying all the way to school. Only person that I could call that could even remotely understand what I was going through was Josh's ex-wife. I couldn't go to his family because blood is thicker than water. And no matter what I would have to say, they would always take Josh's side. And I couldn't go to my side of the family because, again, blood is thicker than water. They could always forgive, but they'll never forget, right? So I couldn't have that conversation with my family either. So the only other person that I could have a conversation with was his ex-wife. And so I called her and I said, I was crying. And I said, I can't go into class and I don't want to go home because he's home. And I don't know what to do. And she said, I'm coming. I'll come and sit with you. And she came and she sat with me in that parking lot at school for an hour and 45 minutes. She's absolutely has seen me at my very worst. But the advice that she gave to me and the things that I was going back and forth with her was, I had woken up that morning and I was looking at a mirror as far as being sexually abused. What triggered that was our growth is stunned at an age that we have been abused, sexually abused, traumatized. And for him, it was the age of 13. So all of his responses to life were coming from that 13-year-old boy. And I can see it. And I needed validation that my responses coming from my 6-year-old trauma were the same as his 13-year-old boy trauma. So I had this conversation with his ex-wife. Now, to a little background on his ex-wife, she's an MFT.
So for the audience, can you describe what that is, since we have a very diverse audience?
It's a marriage family therapist. Number one, she knew the person that I had been married to, was married to. And number two, she also had the tools coming from a therapist to help me around the situation, as well as her own personal experience. So I had talked to her about some of the things that I had seen, and I had asked her, is it quite possible that he was sexually molested? And she kind of sat back for a second. She goes, oh my God, I think you hit the nail on the head. And that night she had gone home and she went through her thesis paper. She wrote her thesis on, I'm assuming parts of it were going to be Josh. She had called her mentor and had gone through some of these things that I had talked to her about, and they both said the same thing. She hit the nail on the head. This is where this is stemming from. And so a couple days later, I had gone home and I had said to him, some of these conversations that I have with you, you're responding emotionally, coming from a young age, not as an adult. So this triggers me because I know what my trauma was. And have you ever been sexually molested? And no, never. I've never been molested, ever. And I just went, oh, okay. But his response to me was so matter of fact. I knew instantly that he was lying to me. And I knew at that moment, this is where his trauma is. So what happened? There was so many people in his life. When did this happen? Whom did this to him? And now I need for him to come to that realization that it's okay to talk about it. So again, it was important for me recognizing as living with an alcoholic. Can't technically tell him that he's an alcoholic. They have to come to that recognition in the first place. Same thing with emotional healing, trauma. You have to come up and recognize that this happened to you, and just verbalizing it the first time is going to give you a little bit of power, but it also makes it real. So with him suppressing his shadow monster for so long, he was believing his lie that, this didn't happen. But until he actually told his sponsor that this happened to make it real in the outside world, I had to wait for that. And so that day finally came about 6 months later after I had that initial conversation. And it was April 2020 in the midst of a pandemic. We were upstairs in our room watching TV, and he had just gotten out of the shower and came and cuddled with me in bed while we were watching TV. And he started telling me a story about a kid who trusted someone that his dad had worked with. This man groomed him, and he was talking about the way that he groomed him, which were, his family didn't have a lot of money, so this man was providing those loose ends that his family needed. As little as they were of putting together a workout regimen for Josh as he was in high school, or a meal plan, and, helping him grow muscles that groomed him into trusting this person. And so I had somebody in my life at that time that was triggering to Josh that I didn't know. The person ended up being a best friend of mine for about 20 years. He ended up being, the uncle to my kids. Yet I didn't recognize that the things that had happened to Josh were some of the things that my friend was doing for my kids. Not that this person had harmed my kids, but his actions were triggering to Josh.
Which that's got to be really hard because he loves you, and this individual is a trusted friend of yours. And I can only imagine, having gone through trauma myself and having my daughter, that my natural reaction, I think myself, if I saw that, would be one of paranoia, protection, and just assuming this individual was all of the things that the perpetrators for me were.
Right. Exactly. And so I recognized that this person was triggering to him. So kind of going back a little bit, by the end of Josh's story, I had recognized that he was actually talking about himself. And this was him telling me that he had been sexually abused. I didn't ask any questions. For me, I felt that it was important for me not to ask. If he wanted to tell me that information, he would tell me that information. I don't need to pry. However, my reaction to him was, I think it's time that we find you a therapist that has experience and expertise in not only sexual trauma, but also alcoholism and addiction, because you don't just have one addiction as an alcoholic or as an addict. Typically there's 2 or 3 or 4 more. So I knew that there was other addictions that he had that I wasn't privy to just yet. And so for me, getting him into therapy so he can talk about these things in a safe place with somebody that he trusted was really key for me, because that was the only way that I was going to be able to get him to talk about what he needed to talk about, which was his sexual abuse, because that's the only way that he's going to be able to heal. And for me, the more I talk about my sexual abuse, what happened to me, I'm taking my power back. And I wanted that same for him. And I figured the more that he can talk about it, the more power he's going to take back in his own journey. So he found a therapist. We got him going in with this therapist, and it was, weekly, and it was fantastic. I was seeing changes with him. I was seeing him come to me and being overly communicative with me. This also goes back to trust, right? I need you to be overly communicative with me because I'm learning to trust you again. And trust just doesn't happen overnight. It takes time, sometimes years. And it's not necessarily just one trust issue. It could be a plethora of trust issues, from emotional to financial. There's several. He was going in and having his therapy sessions, and I was in my own therapy sessions. And we finally found a therapist for both of us, because that was also super important. We needed to both have our own therapist, and then we can have a together therapist, if that makes sense. But we needed to have a therapist together. And so that was huge. And so we would talk about what would be triggering to him. I mentioned to the therapist, it's really important that he talks about this. And he said, there's things I will never discuss. I never, ever, ever, ever want to talk about what this man did to me. And that upset me. And I started crying. He goes, this is why I don't want to talk about it, because she gets upset. And I said, I'm not upset that you won't talk about it because of what happened to you. What I'm upset about is that somebody hurt you so badly that you will never speak about it. That speaks volumes to me as a sexual survivor. I can only imagine what happened. But again, I'm imagining what happened. So it wasn't until probably this book came out that he was more forward in his book about what happened to him than he was with me. So yeah, there was a lot in his book that I learned as well. And there's still things, his upcoming book, that he talks about his shadow monster and things. So, he's still on that healing journey. And I'm super proud of him for being able to talk openly about his shadow monster. Just talking about it just brings all that power back to you because you're not allowing that person to keep you silent. And that's so important that we have our voice back because we need it.
You know what? So I'm thinking of a few things that are so powerful. First off, I will tell Joshua you did a good job giving a little teaser for his upcoming book. Remind me that the new one is Craving Identity, correct?
That is correct.
Awesome.
Craving Identity.
Yep. And I say that in jest. I'm really excited to read the new book that's coming up. So, but I did want to have a little laugh there. And one of the things that I'm thinking as you're telling this story, and I am reflecting back, I did an interview yesterday with a guest, Lee, who is going to talk about her experience of grief in dealing with her sister's suicide and about how in her family, the family has not talked about this suicide. It has become this shameful secret that is put under the rug. And because that has become the norm in this family, then she has struggled with trying to grieve, trying to grow through this, trying to remember the fabulous times with her sister. And so I think there's so much joy stolen by keeping these secrets because, as you just said, that it's the secrets, whatever secrets we as human beings keep, instead of speaking up and talking about them in whatever forum is the most appropriate for us. Whatever those secrets are, they steal our joy.
They do.
Constantly steal our joy. And one of the things I was thinking when I was talking to Lee yesterday, we were talking about, okay, for some individuals and being a widow, for some individuals, when you experience grief, you may find a support group with like-minded tribe individuals. Same thing with trauma. You may find a support group. You may not. I did say to her yesterday, I said, you do realize you now officially have been in a support group because you've recorded this on the podcast and all the listeners are now going to be cheering for you. They are part of your support group. And another way to heal is to write about it and include it in a book. And I personally find that to be very powerful for myself because I find that when I'm sharing parts of my story in that way, I also I'm more willing to be more vulnerable because I have in the back of my head, I just want this to help somebody else.
Right.
And when it does, then I'm also saying, okay, I'm speaking up for myself. I'm speaking up for the individual who's not brave enough yet to speak up for themselves.
Right.
I'm speaking up for those who can't speak up for themselves. And I'm taking back power to all of the victims who deserve to have that power.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, taking your power back, you need that in order to heal. Because if you're not taking back your power or you're not speaking your truth, you can't heal. You're constantly going to be in this hamster wheel of trying something different, but you're still getting the same result, which is insane, right? So you got to change that around. And as cliche as it is, we have to face our fears. We have to talk about it because if we don't, it is the dirty little secret. And we are better than a dirty little secret. I refuse to be a dirty little secret. And I refuse my children to be dirty secrets or Josh to be a dirty secret. We all need to speak our truth. And there's just something about being able to do that that just makes you feel incredibly proud of yourself and fulfilled and whole as a person. And I'm still doing work on my own. I mean, I feel like every day is a new day to learn something new about yourself or take back a little bit more of your power. One of the things that I had mentioned earlier is I was 18 and raped by my boyfriend's best friend. I was in a situation where I was coming home from a party. He was driving my car and we parked and he got on top of me while I was in the passenger seat. And as many times as I said no to him, I finally gave in because there was no way that he was going to back off. And so I went home that night and felt dirty and gross and showered. And I called my boyfriend and told him what had happened. And I was 18 at the time. And he didn't talk to this guy for 3 days and then became best friends again with him. I mean, it made me feel super gross. It's like you guys are buddies again. Like, I just told you what happened and you're not taking me seriously. So as, time went on and, friends that I had met from high school later in life, I had also learned that this person had also sexually raped them, sexually abused other girls in the same city as well. And I was like, I'm just astonished. But moving on, has this person ever, no, nothing's ever happened to him. Would I ever bring it? No, because it's not worth my time or energy.
And yet it probably told you a lot about the character of your boyfriend. And I'm really glad you are with them. And speaking of character of the individual, I strongly believe you can tell so much about human beings based on how they react to events. And so Maddie in episode 9 shared her story of sexual trauma and addiction, her recovery. It is our second most downloaded episode. The story is amazing. And she's so powerful and she's so brave. And one of the things that stands out to me was I'm thinking about you telling when Josh came to you and you guys had this conversation is when she went to her parents and said, this is what happened, because it was a colleague of her father's as well. Her parents did not say anything like, oh, this probably didn't happen. You probably made none of the fears that a lot of us have, or some of the experiences a lot of people do have. Her parents said, we believe you.
Right.
And Maddie said that was just so powerful in her healing journey was for the people that she loved, because she was also, and Jody talks about it in her episode on opiate addiction and childhood abuse, which is episode 16. And both of them talk about growing up, being raised in the church, saving themselves for marriage, and then having these huge sexual traumas and the level of guilt and responsibility that they had, which then fed into addiction in order to overcome that trauma, which Joshua talks about a lot in the book, in order to just not have to feel, not have to think, and not also, as you mentioned quite well, being stagnant at the age that it happened. So also not fully be able, and I want listeners to hear this and listen to those other episodes because they're powerful. Because something you're talking about, Sasha, is it's not just, for example, with Joshua, from what I understand, correct me if I'm wrong, but from what I understand, true recovery for him and the relapses didn't stop until he was able to speak about this and figure out that this trauma was a big part of it.
That's
and
correct.
that, yes. And I think that when individuals struggle in this cycle of relapse, I think part of it is that society as a whole, we forget that once again, an addict didn't just one day decide they wanted to be an addict. There is a story behind every single individual's addiction or every individual's struggle. And recovery through that story is multifaceted. And you're very powerful in sharing that you did therapy and he did therapy and you guys did therapy together, which I think is that must be why both of you, when you talk about each other, just glow with love and affection, because you have, you said to him, I'm not going to quiz you about every single thing that happened when he first told you. You gave him space.
You have
and yet
to,
you pushed.
You have to, I mean, for me, I just think that's just the human decency, is just to give space, even though I'm morbidly curiosity, right? I'm curious about death and crazy things. But when it comes down to serious issues, you got to give space. You got to just allow people to come out and talk about it when they're ready to. However, sometimes you need a little coaxing. You need a little coaxing to help mend and heal those wounds. But yeah, going back to Josh, it wasn't until he actually spoke those words to his sponsor that he was sexually abused. And that is all that he said. His sponsor said, okay, cool, let's move on. You know, he also gave Josh grace because these are huge issues. I mean, these are really big, big secrets. And yes, going back to the secrets will kill your relationship, regardless of whatever their secret is. You can't have secrets in a relationship. It's terrible. Your spouse can feel that there's something missing. There's something that you're just not talking about. It's a missing part of you. And secrets are just dirty. Frankly, they are. And, and especially sexual secrets, they're dirty and they shouldn't make you feel that way. You need to be whole. You should be able to talk about your traumas and your issues freely without somebody making you feel bad or somebody questioning you if you're not ready for it yet. Lots and lots of therapy healing.
Well, I believe everyone should do some form of therapy, because one of the quotes that I love was from the book Brave, 52 Weeks Being Mindful with Dr. Constance. And he has in the book, every life matters, including yours. Start acting like it. And the reason I love that quote is I think sometimes we forget about our own life also matters. Yeah. And by utilizing and learning new tools and therapy of a variety of modalities and types, then all we're doing is allowing ourselves to live our best life.
Yes.
As someone I know said, we're leaning into discomfort and allowing for that to happen, which is powerful, and we deserve it. Yes. And I strongly believe a lot of individuals hold themselves back from being their be brave, be badass, their most badass self because of fear,
yes.
A fear of someone's going to judge me. Someone's going to think it's my fault. Someone's going to think I'm less than. And repeatedly, I hear over and over when people share their stories, then the people you want to be around, those people who are part of your tribe that you need to be and walk this and fight this journey of life with, those individuals will not have those reactions.
That's right.
Those individuals will give you grace. And so if you're listening to this, listeners, and you're thinking, how can I be the best tribe member or person for someone? It is to be able to say, I am so sorry. There are no words. I am here for you.
Yeah.
At any point you want to share anything, or you want to share nothing, or you need a hug, or you don't want a hug, or you need a high five, or empathy. You don't.
Empathy.
Yes.
You need to have empathy. It's so important just to listen and hear somebody out about their experience, and don't minimize it. Their experience is their experience, and it was huge for them. You may have a different experience, and it may not have been as huge for you as it was for them. And everybody's experiences are different, and everybody heals differently, and everybody's story is different. But we all are human, and we all have to have grace, and we all have to have compassion and empathy for people with abuse.
So well said. And thinking recently, I hear sometimes individuals say, oh, accomplishing this in life, or stopping to drink, or stopping to do something that goes against your belief or something like that is easy. No, wait. I want to be very clear to listeners. Just because something is easy for you, absolutely does not mean that it's easy for someone else. And it doesn't mean that that individual who's struggling a little bit more with something similar that you've struggled with, that they are any less than anyone else. Their experience is just different. And so my first child was stillborn. And yet when I meet individuals and they have a stillborn child or they've lost a child, I do not say, I know exactly what you're going through, because I don't. We never know exactly what somebody else is going through. We can just say, I'm here for you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, my mom passed away 2.5 years ago from alcohol liver cirrhosis. But my mom wasn't an alcoholic. Something really tragic actually happened that led her to this diagnosis. But my stepdad was a new widow. And so when my mom passed away, I put the hat down from being the grieving daughter to helping my stepdad understand I've been in these shoes of losing your spouse. I know the things that he's going to go through over the next, couple of months. So it was important for me to be there for him to understand the loss of his spouse. And, I kind of put that grieving of my mom away for a while. I had to, because I needed to step up to be there for him.
And knowing you, I bet you also did an excellent job at understanding what it's like to lose a partner.
Right.
And also understanding that your experience and your journey is different from his.
Absolutely. And yet we were grieving the same person.
Yes. And maybe let's briefly talk about that and then share if there's anything that you want to make sure we cover that we didn't cover. I want to tag into this because this is a big topic that Lee and I talked about in regards to the loss of her sister who died by suicide. Was she very much went into executive functioning mode when she found out from her mother, and she flew across country, and she really did not take the opportunity at any point during that to grieve, because she went into being the strong, stable family member who was planning the cremation, who was planning all of these types of events. And that has a psychological impact on her as well as an individual, because everyone needs to grieve. Everyone deserves to grieve, and it's different for everyone. So can you perhaps talk a little bit about that struggle and what that struggle is like for you?
Yeah, I mean, grieving my mom was really difficult. I have lived down in Southern California since the age of 13. So my relationship with my mom was, by phone. We would talk on the phone every single day. But losing her and not being able to pick up a phone and call her has been devastating. It's only been 2.5 years. Definitely stepping up to the plate for my stepdad was a no-brainer for me. It was just instinct. I had to go and help him and get his things in order. Because, in his mind, the love of his life just passed away. The rest of the things in the house needs to be handled. She was cremated, and some of her tissues went to donors, and, we had to make decisions. My brother was also up there. He made a lot of decisions as well. However, putting my grief aside to help my family also rubbed some of my family members the wrong way. They took my stepping up to help out as me not having any empathy whatsoever, or not having any interest in my mom's funeral. And it really ruffled some feathers, specifically with my brother, which was really hard in itself, because not only did I feel like had I just lost my mom, but I had also felt like I was also losing my brother, because my brother and I were not united at the moment. So that was really difficult. There's still an elephant in the room with my brother. There's still things that we haven't talked about. It's really been hard. It's difficult trying to be that person while you're grieving. You still need to grieve, because that's the only way that you're going to heal, but still also having empathy of knowing what my dad was going through, my stepdad, what he was going through. and the things that he was going to need. There's just so much. But yes, it gets crazy when you have family involved because everybody is hurting on a different level. And everyone is looking at people and how they're grieving or they're not grieving enough for your thoughts, or they're grieving too much. Something's wrong with them. They're grieving too much. Or, I mean, everybody is judging each other, which there should not be any judgment when someone passes away in your family. We're all there grieving the same person, but everybody grieves differently, and you can't make assumptions of how because someone's acting one way means that they're not necessarily grieving correctly. I don't think there's a correct way to grieve. Everybody reacts differently.
I agree 1000%. There's no correct way. There's no correct way to heal. There's no correct way to grieve. There's no correct way to do any of these things. And I think a correct thing to do is to give each other grace, love, peace, stability, empathy, grounding, a safe place for comfort. And I think that's the correct way that we can try and be our best to each other as human beings. Just be good humans to our fellow humans. And
Absolutely.
That's amazing. So is there anything else you wanted to make sure we cover today that we haven't already talked about?
I appreciate the opportunity coming on today to talk about my traumas and my healings. And that's it. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
So do you have a new favorite quote? Did you bring another favorite quote for today?
I didn't bring another favorite quote. That's really bad of me. You know, I literally live by it is what it is. Those are my everyday word because it speaks to my control of what I can control and what's out of my control. It is what it is.
Perfect. Absolutely beautiful. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it was amazing.
You just listened to episode number 28. The third in our Young Family series, where Sasha shared her personal resilience and triumph story. We hope you've been encouraged and learned something from today's interview and the entire series. If you missed the earlier episodes, make sure to listen to Joshua's story in episode 26 and the first part of Sasha's story in episode 27. As a reminder, the experiences and advice expressed in this episode are the host and guest's own personal stories and do not represent the opinions of any organization mentioned. RAN is passionate about opening the doors for all voices and experiences, not just those expressed in any particular podcast. If you want to share your experiences or expertise, we encourage you to be a featured guest by emailing us at podcast@recoveryadvocatenetwork.org or submit a blog post by emailing blog@recoveryadvocatenetwork.org. We've started a new blog series where we will read select blog posts on the podcast, so submit your blog post today. We also encourage you to comment on the episode so that we can continue to provide content that is most beneficial to the community. If you do, we'll give you a shout out. We are proud that every individual working with RAN does so on a 100% volunteer basis. You can support the mission by clicking the love, not like icon on our podcast and subscribing. We hope you will also connect with us at www.recoveryadvocatenetwork.org, where you can donate to the mission, read blog posts, and stay in the loop about upcoming events. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Recovery Advocate Network and on Twitter at RAN to Wellness. So, listeners, pause what you're doing, subscribe, follow us, please give us a 5-star rating, and provide us some feedback. And finally, share these episodes with your friends. You never know whose hearts you will touch. Be a part of the reason someone has new hope today. If this episode was triggering to you, we encourage you to contact your support system, therapist, national and community support groups, the Global Crisis Text Line by texting 741-741, and/or, if in the United States, dialing 988 to reach the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. If you're in the U.S. and need additional resources, such as shelter, support group resources, transportation, food, and/or a safe, confidential path out of physical or emotional domestic abuse, call 211 or visit www.211info.org for assistance. We know you are super busy and you have a lot of things to do, so we're really grateful you chose to spend some time with us today. Thanks for joining us. Now, sit back, enjoy the rest of your coffee. Until next time.